بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم آمين. So we continue with the sharh of Taqreed al-Tadmurriyah, and we covered a few qawaid and principles before the salah, and inshallah ta'ala we continue with even more principles and concepts and qawaid inshallah. فنبدأ مستعينين بالله تعالى. The author رحمه الله تعالى says وَاعْلَمْ أن الاشتراك في الأسماء والصفات لا يستلزم تماثل المسميات والموصوفات كما دل على ذلك السمع والعقل والحس. So he moves to a new principle now. Okay, he moves ماذا to a new principle, and he says sharing the same name or attribute, okay, does not mean similarity. Sharing the same name, two entities sharing the same name, same attribute, doesn't mean that they both are equal, that they both ماذا are the same. And he says that this qaida or this principle, the dalil for this principle is as-sam'u wal-aqlu wal-hissu. What does sam' mean? Quran and Sunnah. Aql means rational or logic, and al-hiss means ماذا? Your senses and your perceptions. Okay, all three indicate to this principle. So as for the sam', Allah Azza wa Jal, he says regarding himself, إِنَّ اللَّهَ نِعِمَّ مَا يَعِظُكُمْ بِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. What two evidences, what two attributes does Allah Azza wa Jal ascribe for himself here? As-sam'u wa al-basar. Tamam. And regarding the human, Allah Azza wa Jal says, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِن نُطْفَةٍ أَمْشَاجٍ نَبْتَلِيهِ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ إيش سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. What two attributes does Allah give to humans? Sam'u al-basar. So Allah is describing himself as سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. صح? He describes the human as سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. So what is the principle we're learning now? Sharing the same name or attribute doesn't necessitate similarity. Is the sam' of Allah similar to the sam' of the creation? No. Is the basar of Allah similar to the basar of the creation? The answer is no. Okay? So then he says وَنَفْيُ أَنْ يَكُونَ السَّمِيعُ كَالسَّمِيعُ وَنَفَى أن يكون السميع كالسميع والبصير كالبصير. So Allah Azza wa Jal then, in a third verse, he negates the fact that the sami' is like the fact that Allah's sam' and basar are similar to the sam' and the basar of the creation. He says what? ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. So Allah, although he described the human being as Sami' and Basir, Allah described the human as Sami' and Basir. He described himself as Sami' and Basir. And in a third verse, Allah says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like Allah. There is nothing similar to Allah. So the Sam' of Allah is not like the Sam' of the creation. The Basar of Allah is not like the Basar of the creation, and so on and so forth. And then he says وَأَثْبَتَ لِنَفْسِهِ عِلْمًا وَلِلْإِنسَانِ عِلْمًا فَقَالَ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ. So Allah, so that's one example. Now he moves on to the next example. He says that Allah Azza wa Jal, he affirmed for himself knowledge, and he affirmed for the human knowledge. So Allah Azza wa Jal, he says regarding himself, عَلِمَ اللَّهُ أَنَّكُمْ سَتَذْكُرُونَهُنَّ. عَلِمَ اللَّهُ. So Allah affirmed for himself the attribute of knowledge. As for the human, Allah Azza wa Jal said, فَإِنْ عَلِمْتُمُوهُنَّ مُؤْمِنَاتٍ فَلَا تَرْجِعُوهُنَّ إِلَى الْكُفَّارِ. فَإِنْ عَلِمْتُمُوهُنَّ. If you know that they're believers. So Allah affirmed for himself knowledge, and he affirmed for humans knowledge. Okay? However, is the knowledge of Allah, the unlimited knowledge of Allah, the all-encompassing knowledge of Allah, similar to the limited knowledge of the humans? Of course not. Of course not. So just because they both share the same name doesn't make them similar, or doesn't make them equal. Okay? And Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَسِعَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَخْفَى عَلَيْهِ شَيْءٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فِي السَّمَاءِ. So Allah, look at how He describes His knowledge. وَسِعَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا. Allah encompasses everything in knowledge. Okay? إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَخْفَى عَلَيْهِ شَيْءٌ. Allah, nothing is hidden from Allah. Nothing is hidden from Allah Azza wa Jal. يعني as some of the Ibn al-Qayyim or some of the scholars mentioned, يعني Allah Azza wa Jal has knowledge or can see the black ant that is crawling on a black rock in the darkest of nights. Allah knows this and can see this. Dabib al-Naml, He can see this naml or this small ant. Okay, so nothing escapes Allah's knowledge. And regarding the knowledge of the creation or the knowledge of the human, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. So Allah describes the knowledge of the human as qalil, as ماذا? Limited and minute. Okay? So that tells us that just because Allah affirmed the name, ilm. Yani Allah gives Himself the name al-alim or ilm, the attribute of knowledge, and He gives the human the attribute of knowledge. But just because the names are similar doesn't make the entities similar, doesn't make the entities equal. Okay? So that's evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah for this qa'idah. Now we move on we move to the rationale or the logic. So regarding the knowledge, regarding logic, he says, فمن المعلوم بالعقل أن المعاني والأوصاف تتقيد وتتميز بحسب ما تضاف إليه فكما أن الأشياء مختلفة في ذواتها فإنها كذلك مختلفة في صفاتها وفي المعاني المضافة إليها. So he says فمن المعلوم بالعقل أن المعاني والأوصاف تتقيد وتتميز بحسب ما تضاف إليه. So this is well known, he says, it's a well known fact, okay, logically, that attributes and descriptions are restricted and differ based upon what they are ascribed to, based on the subject matter, on what they are ascribed to. Okay, example. Okay, you have a hand, صح? Allah has given you a hand. Is your hand similar to the hand of the door? The door also has a handle, it's called a handle, صح? Okay, so the hand of the door is different to your hand. How do we know? Because of the fact that the hand, the word hand or this attribute is ascribed to a physical entity. And that physical entity differs. So when it's ascribed to you, your physical entity, the hand, your hand is the hand that has 5 fingers. When ascribed to a door, it's the handle of the door that differs pertaining to the door it's attached to and the design of the door. Similarly, an elephant has a foot. صح? Is the foot of an ant has a foot or feet. Is the foot of an ant, one of the feet, if the foot of the ant, is it similar to the foot of the elephant? No. Okay, so when he says فمن المعلوم بالعقل أن المعاني والأوصاف تتقيد وتتميز بحسب ما تضاف إليه, he's saying that it's a well-known fact that attributes differ, okay, and they're restricted in their meaning with regards to the physical entity that they are attached to, with regards to what their subject matter is. Okay, so this glass مثلا, okay, or this cup or glass cup, this has a handle. It has a handle, but it's different to the handle of the door. The name is the same. Handle, the name is the same. But the reality is different. Why is the reality different? Because of the physical entity that the attribute is attached to. Similarly, Allah Azza wa Jal, He is Alim, He is Qadir, He has knowledge, He has Sam', He has hearing, and He has Basar, and He has sight. Likewise, the human being has knowledge, has sight, has hearing. But the sight, the hearing, and the knowledge or the power of the human being, is it similar to the one, to the sight, the hearing, the quwwah, the strength, or the knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal? Of course not. Why? It's because of the physical entity that these attributes are attached to. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, and to Allah belongs the highest of descriptions. So we are not like Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal is, there's no comparison between us and Allah Azza wa Jal. So of course, when there's no comparison between Allah Azza wa Jal, of course the attributes are also going to be as different as the entities themselves. So that's what the author rahimahullah ta'ala is telling you here. Okay, then he says, فكما أن الأشياء مختلفة في ذواتها فإنها كذلك مختلفة في صفاتها وفي المعاني المضافة إليها. So he says just like things are different to each other in their essence, in the physical essence they're different to each other, similarly their attributes also differ. Their attributes that are ascribed to them also differ. Human beings themselves, one person, two people have both the attribute of sight. One of them is short-sighted and the other is far-sighted. Is their sight the same? The answer is no. Two people standing next to each other, one of them can lift heavy weights, 100 kilos, they can lift it on their shoulder. Another person cannot even lift 10 kilos on their shoulder because their shoulder is fractured, or they're sick. But they both can lift something. They both have some strength. But the strength of the first is unlike the strength of the second. وهكذا إخواني. He says, فإن صفة كل موصوف تناسبه لا يفهم منها ما يقصر عن موصوفها ويتجاوزه. He says that the attribute of every described entity is tunasibuhu, is an attribute that is befitting of him, befitting of this person. Okay? And we can't understand that this, it's not befitting for us to understand that this attribute is an attribute that far exceeds their physical ability, or it's an attribute that is deficient of their physical ability. We can't understand that. Alaykum as-salam. ولهذا he says نصف الإنسان باللين والحديد المنصهر باللين. He says this is why the human being مثلا can be described as soft. When you touch someone, you can say this person has soft skin, مثلا soft. And the hadid, molten iron can also be described as soft. But ikhwan fillah, is the softness of the molten iron, is it similar to the softness of the human? Of course not. شتان ما بينهما. There's a big, huge difference between them. وَنَعْلَمُ أَنَّ اللِّينَ مُتَفَاوِتُ الْمَعْنَى. نعم. So that's basically from logic and rationale. What is the principle we're establishing now? Who can repeat the principle we're establishing? Bismillah. Don't memorize the examples, ikhwan fillah. You have to memorize the principle, understand the principle. Once you've understood the principle, then take one example and understand it. Okay, so what is that principle? نعم تفضل. الاشتراك في الأسماء لا يستلزم التماثل. In English now, that's good. In English, what does that mean? ما معنى هذا?
The names sharing the same name
نعم.
not necessitate the being
similar.
similar.
نعم. Sharing the same name doesn't necessitate. Sharing the same name or the same attribute doesn't mean that they are the same. Doesn't mean that they are equal or the same. تمام. So we've understood this qaida, the principle, okay? We've learned the dalil as-sam'i, the textual evidence, and we've learned the rational and the logical evidence, and now we're going to learn the evidence from perception and natural disposition of fitrah. So he says, فَإِنَّنَا نُشَاهِدُ لِلْفِيلِ جِسْمًا وَقَدَمًا وَقُوَّةً. Okay, he says, we can see that the elephant has a body, has a foot, and has strength. The elephant, you all know what the elephant, صح? This great animal that can literally that can move, or that can move trees, and can basically destroy a car, and its strength. So we know it has a strength, we know it has a body, huge body, and we know it has a foot. وَلِلْبَعُوضَةِ جِسْمًا وَقَدَمًا وَقُوَّةً. And we know that the mosquito also has a body, also has a foot, and also has some strength. ونعلم الفرق بين جسميهما وقدميهما وقوتيهما. We know the difference between the two entities. We know the difference between the elephant and the mosquito. We know the difference in their strength. We know the difference in their feet, and we know the difference in their bodies. فإذا علم أن الاشتراك في الاسم والصفة في المخلوقات لا يستلزم التماثل في الحقيقة مع كون كل منها مخلوقا ممكنا، فانتفاء التلازم في ذلك بين الخالق والمخلوق أولى وأجلى، بل التماثل في ذلك بين الخالق والمخلوق ممتنع غاية الامتناع. So he says, now this is all of that was a muqaddimah. Though that was a ma'ish, a muqaddimah. Muqaddimah meaning was an intro. He's now going to tell you the gist of it. So he says, if we know that the ishtirak, the sharing of names and attributes between creations, okay, doesn't necessitate equality or equivalence or similarity in reality, okay, whilst at the same time each attribute, okay, creation, each creation is a creation that is mumkin al-wujud, that's a creation in the fact that its existence is temporary or existence is a possibility. It's a da'if, it's a weak creation. If we know this, he says, if we know this fact, فانتفاء التلازم في ذلك بين الخالق والمخلوق أولى وأجلى. If we know this fact, then negating equality and similarity, okay, between the creator and the creation is more worthy and more deserving and even clearer. In fact, he says, the similarity between the creator and the creation is impossible. غاية الامتناع, it is something that is extremely impossible and absurd. مستحيل يعني كيف؟ If the ba'uda has a quwwah, the mosquito has a quwwah, strength, and the feel, the elephant, has strength. They both have some element, some strength. That doesn't mean, okay, and we know that the strength of the elephant and the strength of the ba'uda and the mosquito is different, although each of them have the attribute of strength, and that is between two created beings. Then the difference between the creator and the creation is even clearer. So even if the creation, the makhluq, has the attribute of as-sam' wal-basar, okay, and the creator has the attribute of as-sam' wal-basar, then we know, because the entities are different, al-dhawat mukhtalifa, we know that their difference, okay, their taghayur and their difference is awla wa ajla, it's even more worthy and it's even clearer, يعني. It's ماذا? Even clearer. So, يعني just to make this even more simpler, inshallah, look, you have a method between you, every name, okay? Let's use the sifatul basar, the attribute of sight, okay? The attribute of sight, okay? مثلا, you have two people, okay? They have a common denominator. One is very short-sighted, nearly blind, يعني, but very short-sighted. They can see light. They can see small things. Another creation is like the eagle that can see miles ahead. يعني, can see a small mouse kilometers away. Okay, both of them have يطلق عليهم صفة البصر. Both of them can be said that they can both see. But the sight of this person who's half blind is of course not similar to the sight of the eagle. But they have a common denominator. قدر مشترك بينهما. They have a small common denominator between them, which is the fact that each of their eyes, okay, can comprehend some light. So, يعني the first one isn't blind. لا يطلق, يعني you can't say he's blind. Okay, so they have a common denominator between them, but there's a huge difference between them. Okay, so the common denominator is just the name itself, just the name or the attribute of sight. Likewise, Allah Azza wa Jal, okay, يعني Allah Azza wa Jal, He can see everything. He can comprehend everything. Okay, He can see everything at the same time. Okay, in every corner of the earth, He can see what's happening inside a cave, and at the same time He can see what's happening on top of a mountain. Okay, so Allah Azza wa Jal has this attribute of basar, but this attribute of al-basar is an attribute of complete perfection, limitless sight. Okay, whereas the created or the human also has sight. He can see مثلا the best, يعني even if he has a 20/20 vision, he can see يعني light. His eyes can pick up light. He can see people. He can read small. He can see يعني he has good 20/20 vision. But that person cannot see behind the wall. So of course his sight is limited. But there is a common denominator between the sight of Allah and the sight of the creation, which is the fact that the name itself, something insignificant. Okay? So just because they both have the same name and the same attribute doesn't mean they are both equal. This is the principle that Shaykh al-Islam wants you to understand, so that when we move to the next principle, okay, and he starts refuting the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila and the Asha'ira, okay, you can use this principle to refute these people. Tamam. Let's move on to the next fasl now. He says, فصل في الزائغين he says فصل في الزائغين عن سبيل الرسل وأتباعهم في أسماء الله وصفاته. He says chapter في الزائغين عن سبيل الرسل. يعني this is a chapter regarding في الزائغين, those who deviated from the path of the messengers and their followers, in the chapter of names of Allah and attributes, in the names of Allah and His attributes. So now he's going to speak about those who deviated from the names and the attributes of Allah. So it's important before we begin, Ikhwan Fillah, that you have to understand, Ikhwan Fillah, that without principles, okay, it's impossible for you to refute the deviants. Okay? Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ سَبِيلُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. Allah, He says, and this is Allah Azza wa Jalla clarified His verses, explained them, okay? وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ, so that the path of the mujrimun, the path of the evildoers, becomes clear and apparent for you. So without principles and qawaid, بدون قواعد وبدون معرفة القواعد والضوابط, okay, الرد على أهل البدع صعب المنال مستحيل المنال. فهمتم? It's impossible, it's very difficult, and it's impossible to attain. It's impossible to attain. Meaning, these زائغون عن سبيل الرسل, and you will know more about them now. Each of them have qawaid and principles that they have laid, and foundations that they have laid for their madhab. These foundations go against what you've learned now, and what you will learn inshallah ta'ala throughout this book. And the Shaykh al-Islam is going to explain to you why their mistake. He's going to mention to you what they believe in, why they believe in it, and mansha'u dalalihim, the essence of their misguidance. Okay? So without you having qawa'id, having pillars and foundations, الرد عليهم صعب المنال مستحيل. Refuting them is impossible, or very difficult, if not impossible. So he says here, الزائغون عن سبيل الرسل وأتباعهم في أسماء الله وصفاته قسمان. الزائغون عن سبيل الرسل وأتباعهم, and those who are deviant, okay, or who deviated from the path of the messengers and their followers in the names and attributes of Allah are two types: ممثلة, معطلة, or أهل التمثيل أهل التعطيل. You know what tamthil is, you know what ta'til is. Those who liken Allah and compare Allah to His creation. And the second group, the mu'attila, those who negate and those who reject. وَكُلٌّ مِّنْهُمْ غَلَى فِي جَانِبٍ وَقَصَّرَ فِي جَانِبٍ. He says each of them, يعني the mu'attila and the mumathila, each of them, they were extreme and they exaggerated from one angle, and they had shortcomings and they were negligent in another angle, from another angle. How so? He explains. فالممثلة, he says, غلوا في جانب الإثبات. He says the mumathila, okay, those who أهل التمثيل, they had extremism and they exaggerated when it comes to affirmation. Okay? وقصروا في جانب النفي, and they were negligent and they had shortcomings when it comes to negation. When it comes to negation. So let's stop there for a second. So you have Ahlul Tamthil. We know that affirmation. We Ahlul Sunnah also affirm. Ahlul Sunnah also affirm. فهمتم? But their affirmation is not like the affirmation of Ahlul Sunnah. What's the difference based on what you've just learned? What is the difference between the ithbat of Ahlul Sunnah and the ithbat of the Mumathila? من يجيب؟ نعم.
They share the name, but they're not the same.
لا. نعم. أحسنت. Say that in English.
We affirm and deny, but they only affirm.
أحسنت. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah affirm, but they also negate. They also negate. We use the word negate, not deny. They also negate. Whereas the Mumathila, all they do is affirm, and they don't actually negate anything. And what did we learn is the problem with this? What is the problem with al-ithbatul mahd, pure affirmation? What does that lead to, pure affirmation? Huh? Pure affirmation, what's the problem with it? Sorry? Naam, pure affirmation leads to tamthil. Remember we covered this? Pure affirmation leads to resemblance, tamthil. Okay? So that's what they fell into. As for the mu'attila, غلوا في جانب النفي. They're those who negate. They were extreme in their negation or in their denial. And they were negligent and they had shortcomings when it comes to affirmation. When it comes to affirmation. And what did we say about ta'tilul mahd, pure negation? What does it lead to? Ta'tilul mahd leads to what? Huh? Complete denial. Ahsant. Complete denial. Complete denial. فخرج من كل منهم عن الاعتدال في الجانبين. So each of them deviated from the middle path. Each of them, the mu'attila deviated from the middle path. The mumathila also deviated from the middle path. So al-qism al-awwal. Now we talk about al-qism al-awwal. He says al-mumathila, as for the mumathila, okay, وطريقتهم أنهم أثبتوا لله الصفات على وجه يماثل صفات المخلوقين فقالوا لله وجه ويدان وعينان كوجوهنا وأيدينا وأعيننا ونحو ذلك. So شيخ الإسلام يحكي القول, okay, يحكي القول ثم يذكر أدلتهم الواهية ثم يرد عليهم. So this is the manhaj of Shaykh Islam, is he gives you the qawl, he gives you their qawl, what they said, because now you are Taqreed al-Tadmurriyah. This is, remember I said this is a book lil muntahin. He's now going to expose you to their shubuhat. He's going to expose you to their misconceptions and their doubts. Okay, why? Because you already studied al-Aqeed al-Wasitiyah, you studied مثلا لمعة الاعتقاد, القواعد المثلى, you studied these books, Kitab al-Tawheed. So you're someone who is firmly grounded now. Okay? So now you're allowed to hear these shubahat. But if you're a beginner student of knowledge, you shouldn't be hearing these shubahat. You should first tu'assil nafsak, become firmly grounded in these issues, and then get to Taqreed al-Tadmurriyah, and then you'll understand these shubahat based on what the qawa'id and the principles that you've already learned. Okay? But with that being said, he didn't begin with the shubahat in the book. He first gave you, he set the ground rules, he gave you the principles, and now he's going to give you the Shubhat. So he says, طريقتهم, he says that their method, okay, is that the ممثلة يعني he means أنهم أثبتوا لله الصفات. They affirm for Allah attributes. على وجه يماثل صفات المخلوقين. So they affirm for Allah عز وجل attributes. That يعني they affirm for Allah عز وجل attributes in a manner that causes them to compare Allah or resemble Allah or liken Allah to His creation. Okay? So they say لله وجه, Allah has a face. ويدان, and He has two hands. وعينان, and He has two eyes. That's true. Allah does have يعني the attributes of Allah is اليد والوجه واليدان وهكذا. كوجوهنا, but they say that they are similar to our faces. Allah's face is similar to our faces. That's what they say. Allah's hands are similar to our hands. Allah's eyes are similar to our eyes, and so on and so forth. Allah's hearing is similar to our hearing. Allah's sight is similar to our sight. وهكذا. Okay? And what's their shubha? What is their doubt? Okay? Their doubt is they say, the mumathila, they say that Allah Azza wa Jal spoke to us in the Arabic language. He spoke to us in the Quran, okay? He spoke to us in the Quran and He used the Arabic language. And He used the language that we understand and we comprehend. Okay? And the reason why Allah chose the Arabic language in the Quran is because we understand this language. So Allah Azza wa Jal, okay, knows that we can only understand and we can only comprehend what we can see with our senses. Okay? So if He speaks to us about the unseen, things that our senses cannot comprehend, if He speaks to us about things that we cannot comprehend from the knowledge of the unseen, then what we will apply, we will apply what He has spoken to us about from the unseen to what we know from the world that we can perceive. So with that being said, they said, when Allah gives us His attributes, then we have to judge His attributes and compare His attributes to that which we know from what we can see and perceive, because that's what Allah wants from us, because Allah chose the Quran for us. Why would Allah speak to us in a manner that we don't understand? That's the shubha, ikhwan fillah. Imagine you now explain this shubha to one of the laymen. Some people will be convinced, صح? Let's not kid ourselves. يعني there is it is a shubha, it is very weak if you know the haqq. If you know the haqq, it's very weak. If you have principles, it's very weak. But if you're someone from the layman or يعني you don't really know about Bab al-Asma wa Sifat, you're going to say, yeah, it does make sense. نوعا ما, it does make sense, yes. يعني logically I can understand it. Allah spoke to us in the Arabic language. يعني Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned يعني that يعني He wants us to understand it. يعني the Arabic language is the medium of the Quran. It's a language that's in the Quran. قرآنا عربيا غير ذي عوج لعلهم يعني يتقون أو يفقهون. فهمتم? So it's the language that we understand. So Allah, when He speaks to us about His attributes, then we have to apply these attributes to what we know and what we understand, so we can compare Allah to what we can see and perceive. That's their shubha. Okay? So then he says, وَمَذْهَبُهُمْ بَاطِلٌ, but their madhab and this shubha is batil and false, and it's rejected. بِالسَّمْعِ وَالْعَقْلِ وَالْحِسِّ. أما السمع, as for the sam', Allah Azza wa Jal says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Allah tells us, there's nothing like Allah. They're saying to us, Allah's face and hands is similar to the hands and the face of the creation. Whereas Allah is saying, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, there is nothing like Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah says, فَلَا تَضْرِبُوا لِلَّهِ الْأَمْثَالِ. Do not compare anything to Allah. يعني do not strike parables to Allah Azza. Do not compare. Do not يعني فَلَا تَضْرِبُوا لِلَّهِ الْأَمْثَالِ. Do not strike parables with Allah. يعني do not compare Allah Azza wa Jal to His creation. As for the aql, as for the rationale or the logic, Okay, then from different angles. Okay, number one, okay, التباين بين الخالق والمخلوق في الذات والوجود وهذا يستلزم التباين في الصفات لأن صفة كل موصوف تليق به فالمعاني والأوصاف تتقيد وتتميز حسب ما تضاف إليه. Similar to what we learned previously. He says that the difference between the creator and the creation in their essence and existence, there is a difference. There is a difference between the creator and the created in their essence and in their existence. Even the mumathila will not deny this. If you go to a mumathil now who says this, and you say to him, is there a difference between Allah and His creation, between the essence of Allah and the essence of the creation? Of course he's going to say there is. Of course he's going to say, Ish, there is. If you say to him, is there a difference between the existence of Allah that has no beginning and no end, and the existence of the creation that has a beginning and that has an end? He's going to say, yes, there is a difference. So we use that against them. So that difference, then we say to him, then that difference, okay, in their entities, in their physical entities that you yourself has affirmed, O Mumathil, necessitates that there is a difference in their attributes also. Why are you لماذا تفرق بين الذات والصفات? Why are you making a difference between the physical essence, the that, and the attributes? There should be no difference. If you're saying that the physical entity, Allah's that and His essence is different to the essence of the creation, which is haqq, then you also have to say that there is a difference between the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal, which are part of His physical essence, and the attributes of the creation. Does that make sense, إخوان? أنتم فهمتم؟ تمام. فالمعاني والأوصاف تتقيد وتتميز بحسب ما تضاف إليه. فالمعاني والأوصاف يعني attributes, okay, are restricted and they differ in accordance to بحسب ما تضاف إليه, in accordance to what they are ascribed to, in accordance to the physical entity that they are ascribed to. الثاني, so that's the first دليل عقلي. The second دليل عقلي أن القول بالمماثلة بين الخالق والمخلوق يستلزم نقص الخالق سبحانه لأن تمثيل الكامل بالناقص يجعله ناقصا. Saying يعني or believing that there is a equality, okay, there's an equality or similarity between the creator and the creation necessitates that you believe that the creator has a deficiency. Because comparing that which is perfect to that which is imperfect, okay, makes the one that is perfect imperfect. Do you understand what I said? Comparing that which is perfect to something that is imperfect makes the thing that is perfect imperfect. Naqis. Allah is the most perfect. So if you compare Allah to something that is deficient, something as deficient as a human, you are insulting Allah Azza wa Jal and you fall into kufr, disbelief. You're believing that Allah is also naqis, is also mada, deficient. Just like if you were to compare مثلا a stick with a sword. Okay? You have raised and elevated that which does not deserve to be elevated, the stick, to a station that it doesn't belong in, which is you've lowered the status of the sword. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, and to Allah Azza wa Jal belongs the best descriptions and examples. الثالث, number 3. أن القول بمماثلة الخالق للمخلوق يقتضي بطلان العبودية الحق. يعني, this is very important. Now we move from توحيد الأسماء والصفات to توحيد الألوهية. Okay, توحيد الألوهية. He says that saying or believing that there is a resemblance and an equality between the creator and the created, that destroys or annihilates يعني servitude, the true servitude of يعني the true عبودية. How? Because every aqil and everyone who has any intellect and logic knows that no one will ever lower themselves and humble themselves to that which is deficient. To that ish which is deficient. You lower yourself and you humble yourself to the most perfect. So the mumathila, what they're doing is that they have lowered Allah Azza wa Jal in the sight of the creation. They've made Allah like a human, wal-'iyadhu billah, which is kufr. So then in the hearts of the people, the mumathila, Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't have that status, that high status, because they've made him naqis. So that affects their ubudiyyah and their servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. Because even يعني Ibrahim alayhi salam, he told his people, يعني he was rebuking his people and saying, لِمَ تَعْبُدُ مَا لَا يُبْصِرُ مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ وَلَا يُغْنِي عَنْكُمْ شَيْئًا. Why are you worshipping that which cannot see, that which cannot hear, that which isn't يعني independent, that cannot even serve itself? So Ibrahim was كَانَ يَعِيبُ آلِهَتَهُم, يعني he was shaming their gods and mentioning attributes of deficiency and saying to them, why are you worshipping these deficient creatures that can't hear, can't see, they can't even help themselves? Why? Which means that true servitude is only for the most complete, Allah Azza wa Jal, Al-Kamil, الذي المنزه عن جميع العيوب, the one who transcends every aib and every limitation and every deficiency. So that's ماذا العقل. That's إيش العقل. Now we move on to دليل الحس. The evidence of إيش perception. Okay. وأما الحس, he says, فإننا نشاهد في المخلوقات ما تشترك أسماؤه وصفاته في اللفظ وتتباين في الحقيقة. Same يعني as previously. He says in يعني what we can perceive, what our senses see, okay, is our creations in which يعني creatures in which the names are similar and the attributes are similar in wording, but in reality they are different. And he mentioned the example of the elephant and the mosquito that we covered earlier. Okay, so he says if there is a difference between the elephant and the mosquito, then the difference between the creation and the creator is even more apparent. Okay, which leaves one more shubha. Now he's going to refute their shubha. He says, as for the shubha that Allah Azza wa Jal spoke to us in a language, in things that we understand, then that's true. He says, Allah spoke to us in a language that we understand. إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. Allah says, يعني we created, or يعني إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا, we made it a Qur'an. We revealed the Qur'an that is Arabic. Okay? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ, so that you may understand, you may comprehend. So that's true. And Allah says, كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ إِلَيْكَ مُبَارَكٌ لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ. The Qur'an was revealed for us to ponder over, as Allah mentions in this ayah. وَقَوْلُهُ وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ. Allah sent messengers, okay, with the language of their people, with the dialect and the tongue of their people, so that they may clarify to them. So all of that's true. Okay. So that part of their statement is true. The second part of their statement, which says إذا خاطبنا عن الغائب بشيء وجب حمله على المعلوم في الشاهد فجوابه من وجهين. When they say that when Allah speaks to us about the unseen, and Allah's names and attributes are the unseen, من علم الغيب, okay, then it is obligatory for us to apply what He says about the unseen with what we can see, in the world, okay? And we compare between the two. This is what they said. He says we refute them min wajhain. We refute them from two angles. Number one, he says, أن ما أخبر الله به عن نفسه إنما أخبر به مضافا إلى نفسه المقدسة فيكون لائقا به لا مماثلا لمخلوقاته ولا يمكن لأحد أن يفهم منه المماثل إلا من لم يعرف الله تعالى. He says that everything that Allah says about himself from the unseen, he ascribes to himself. He ascribes to himself. So it's something that is ascribed to his that. To his that. So it is something, so if he ascribes it to himself, then it is something that is befitting his grandeur and his majesty. And it is not something that is comparable to what we can see fil waqi, what we can see in the world around us. So when Allah speaks about himself and ascribes to himself the attribute of as-sam', the attribute of al-basar, the attribute of al-quwwa, al-yadan, al-wajh, وهكذا, these are attributes that are specific to Allah. How so? How do we know this? Because he ascribed it to himself, and we know that his that and his essence is not unlike the essence of anything else. Which means that his attributes are also unlike the attributes of anything else. Okay? And no one should ever understand mumathala. No one should ever understand resemblance. No one should ever compare Allah to his creation. Okay? Because if someone compares Allah to his creation, then that person, he says, Shaykh says, hasn't truly known Allah Azza wa Jal. And this person hasn't truly appreciated Allah's greatness. Allah's greatness. So that's the first response. The second response, he says that it is impossible when Allah speaks about his own attribute, it is impossible that that Allah wants you to compare him to his creation. It's impossible. Why? Because comparison or comparison, Allah comparing himself to his creation, necessitates deficiency in the creator. And Allah knows that if this was the case, then that would mean that Allah wants and this is kufr, by the way, that Allah wants for us to fall into kufr and disbelief. Comparing Allah to his creation or to anything else is kufr and dalal and misguidance. And Allah's statements and words in the Quran can never lead to kufr and disbelief. The mumathila would have you believe that this is what it means. This is what when Allah tells us about بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ وَهَكَذا, and when Allah speaks about his attributes, that Allah wants for us to compare himself to his creation. Whereas if this was the case, then that would mean that Allah wants for us to fall into kufr and misguidance, which is obviously impossible. Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ أَن تَضِلُّوا. Allah doesn't want his servants to fall into to fall into kufr. So that's ماذا? The mumathila. That's the mumathila. Okay? The second qism is al-mu'attila. The second qism is al-mu'attila. The mu'attila are those who deny Allah's names and attributes. وهم الذين أنكروا ما سمى الله تعالى وصف به نفسه إنكارا كليا أو جزئيا. Remember we mentioned ta'til is two types. What are the two types of ta'til? نعم. In English, good, that's correct. Partial and complete. So absolute and partial. You can say absolute ta'til or complete ta'til and partial ta'til. And وحرفوا من أجل ذلك نصوص الكتاب والسنة. So they fell into tahrif first, and then they fell into ta'til. So they did tahrif, distortion, and then they fell into ta'til. So فهم محرفون للنصوص معطلون للصفات. So tahrif, إخواني في الله, this tahrif is in the nusus. Tahrif is in the nusus. تعطيل is ايش؟ في الصفات، في الأسماء والصفات. But tahrif, distortion, happens in the nusus. And this distortion that happens in the nusus leads to ايش؟ تعطيل. Leads to تعطيل. And the Mu'attila are divided into 4 categories. Okay? طيب. الطائفة الأولى, the first group, are الأشاعرة ومن ضاهاهم من الماتريدية وغيرهم. So the Asha'ira, they're the first group of Mu'attila, the Asha'ira. Okay? ومن ضاهاهم من الماتريدية وغيرهم, and those who are similar to them, such as the Maturidiyya and other than them. Okay? وطريقتهم أنهم أثبتوا لله الأسماء وبعض الصفات ونفوا حقائق أكثرها وردوا ما يمكنهم رده من النصوص وحرفوا ما لا يمكنهم رده وسموا ذلك تحريفا تأويلا وسموا ذلك التحريف تأويلا. طيب, 5 things that you need to know about the Asha'ira. Number 1, 5 things that you have to know about the Asha'ira. Number 1, they affirm the names of Allah. Number 2, they affirm only 7 attributes. Number 3, they negate the reality of most of the attributes. Number 4, they reject what they can reject. They reject what they can reject from the nusus, from the text, the Quran and the Sunnah. And number 5, they do tahrif of what they can't reject. And they call this tahrif ta'wil. They call this tahrif ايش? Ta'wil. Tamam. So that's 5 things that you have to know. Now he's going to explain even more. So they affirm 7 attributes. And even in their affirmation of these 7 attributes, their affirmation of these attributes is not like the affirmation of the Salaf of these attributes. They affirm these attributes عن طريق العقل, with their logic, not because Allah mentioned them in the Quran. It's just through their own logic. Okay, what are these attributes? He mentions them: al-hayatu, wal-ilmu, wal-qudratu, wal-sam'u, wal-basaru, wal-kalamu, wal-irada. So he mentions these 7 attributes. Okay, al-hayat, knowledge, life. They affirm that Allah Azza wa Jal has the attribute of a life, knowledge, power, will, speech, hearing, and sight. Okay? How did they get to this conclusion? So their shubha is, they said that what we have negated, anything that they negate, they believe that affirming it necessitates tashbih, necessitates resemblance. Because they're mu'attila, remember the mu'attila غلو إيش? What is the غلو is in what? The mu'attila النفي في جانب النفي. Okay? So they negated. Why? Because they believe that if they affirm, they fell into إيش? Tashbih. They fell into إيش? Tashbih. Or tamthil. Remember the difference between tashbih and tamthil? It doesn't really matter here. Okay? Tashbih sometimes can be used as tamthil. Tamthil can be used as tashbih. But you should know the difference between them, as we mentioned. So that's with what they negated. What about with what they affirmed? As for what they affirmed, يعني how many did they affirm? 7. As for what they affirmed, they said that the aql, logic indicates to that. They said that we affirm these 7 because the logic and rationale tells us to affirm it. And logic cannot make a mistake. According to them, that logic supersedes or precedes text, the Quran and the Sunnah. النقل قبل العقل. They believe that logic is a stronger dalil and a more convincing dalil than the Quran and the Sunnah. Why? Because they say that the Quran and the Sunnah can be misconstrued or misinterpreted, whereas logic cannot. This is their false logic. Even the logic is false. And the Shaykh will explain it. So how did they get to these 7? The Shaykh will, what was the logic that they used to get to these 7 attributes? So they said that with regards to al-Qudra, Allah's infinite power and strength, they said that the creation of everything, okay, is evidence that the Creator has power. Okay? And the fact that everything around us is different to everything else, that people don't look the same, that Allah created different mammals, that there's so many things, different colors, tells us that this Creator has a will, irada. And the fact that this Creator has أحكم وأتقن هذا الخلق, that this Creator has mastered and perfected the creation, okay, this indicates to the attribute of knowledge. That means this Creator has knowledge. And these 3 attributes, al-Qudra, wal-Irada, wa-al-Ilm, they all tell us that this Creator has to be alive to be able to do this. So they gave Allah sifatul hayat. ايش؟ sifatul hayat. Because these 3 attributes, al-Irada, wal-Qudra, wa-al-Ilm, the only thing that can possess it is something that is alive. So that's matter 4 now. And that which is alive can either have the attribute of speech, hearing, and sight, and these are attributes of perfection, or it cannot, or it can't. And the opposite of speech, hearing, and sight is مثلا is al-kharsu wal-samam wal-ama, is dumbness and deafness and blindness. And these 3 attributes are impossible for this Creator that has done all of this to have. So they gave Allah these 3 attributes. So that's 7 attributes that they affirmed according to their logic. So that's the Asha'ira. And the Shaykh al-Islam refutes them. How does he refute them? Okay.
Outside, and she can't open the door in the house. Okay, can you send someone there to open it for her?
تمام. So رد عليهم من وجوه. So their refutation is from different angles. Okay. Number one. Okay. So the refutation of which group? The Asha'ira. Tamam. We understand the shubha, صح? Is there anyone who doesn't understand the shubha? What's the question?
Can you name the 5 beliefs of it?
The 5 what? The 7 attributes you mean?
No, the beliefs of the Ash'ari. So they affirm only 7 attributes.
نعم خلاص خلينا نسأل الإخوة. What were the 5 things that they believed in? Yalla, number 1, let's begin one by one inshallah. Number 1. In English so everyone understands.
They affirm the names.
They affirm
The names.
names. That's number 1. Number 2, نعم.
They affirm only the 7 attributes.
They affirm only 7 attributes. That's number 2. Number 3, نعم.
They negate the reality of most attributes.
They negate the reality of most attributes. 4, نعم.
They rejected what they could from the nusus.
They rejected what they could from the nusus. 5, نعم. They do tahrif and they call it ta'wil. That's 5. Okay, now let's see now. والرد عليهم من وجوه. الأول أن الرجوع إلى العقل في هذا الباب مخالف لما كان عليه سلف الأمة من الصحابة والتابعين وأئمة الأمة من بعدهم. Basically, when they say that we go back to logic and intellect, this goes against the Sahaba. This goes against the madhab of the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, the Imma. This goes against the madhab of the Salaf. Because not one of them ever relied on his logic and intellect. They all went back to the Kitab and the Sunnah. And each one, all of them, the Salaf, all of them, we're talking generations here. Imam al-Bukhari mentioned 1,000 scholars that he met himself. All of them, okay, they affirm Allah's names and His attributes. They affirm whatever Allah has affirmed for Himself. They negate from Allah whatever He negated from Himself. Okay? Affirmation without resemblance. Transcendence without denial. إثبات بلا تمثيل تنزيه بلا تعطيل. Not a single one of them said, let's go back to that logic. So what the Asha'ira have done is they've gone against the unanimous ijma' of the ummah. Okay? Al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he says, نصف الله بما وصف به نفسه نصف الله بما وصف به نفسه. He says that we describe Allah with that which He described Himself with. لا نتعدى القرآن والحديث. شوفوا, he says the wording. We don't go beyond the Quran and the Hadith. That's it, خلاص يعني. يعني is there فماذا بعد الحق إلا الضلال. What is there after the Quran and the Sunnah? يعني the Asha'ira, subhanallah, what they would have you believe is that the Quran and the Sunnah, there's doubts in the istidlal and the dilala. And the logic, their logic, subhanallah, is the only logic, the only measurement of haqq is the logic of the Ash'ari. Subhanallah. ثانيا, number 2, the second refutation is أن الرجوع إلى العقل. So the first refutation is what, إخوان? يلا من يعيد. What's the first refutation, إخوان? نعم.
They went against the Salaf.
They went against the Salaf. خلاص. They went against the Salaf. They went against the ijma' of the Salaf. Did the Salaf rely upon the aql? لا, they didn't rely upon the aql. They relied upon Kitab and the Sunnah. Number 2, أن الرجوع إلى العقل في هذا الباب مخالف للعقل. سبحان الله. He says that going back to logic, Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah ta'ala, going back to logic in this issue goes against logic itself. goes against logic itself. يعني أن الرجوع إلى العقل في هذا الباب مخالف للعقل. سبحان الله. Going against logic, he says using logic goes against logic. Okay? So using logic or relying on logic in this bab of al-asma wa sifat goes against logic. How? Because everything in al-asma wa sifat is min al-umur al-ghaybiyah. ما معنى الأمور الغيبية? The knowledge of the unseen. صح? Unseen, meaning your logic and your intellect can only comprehend what your eyes see. صح? And what your ears can hear, what your senses can perceive. أليس كذلك? So if you can't see Allah, you can't obviously see His attributes. Okay? There's nothing similar to Allah that you can compare Allah to. There is no source of truth out there that has ever described the entity of Allah that you can trust. So your logic is rendered useless. So for you to be for you to say that I'm going to rely upon the logic is illogical in and of itself, because your logic, you can only rely on your logic with what your senses have already perceived, and Allah's names and attributes Allah Himself has never been seen or comprehended. So how can you rely on logic? So their reliance on logic is illogical. واضح? Okay. So al-bab al-asma' wa sifat can only be derived and taken from the sam', can only be taken from the Quran and the Sunnah. Because logic, he says, لا يمكنه أن يدرك بالتفصيل. يعني you cannot logically understand in detail ما يجب, what is obligatory, ويجوز, or what is permissible, or ويمتنع, or impossible when it comes to haqqullah, when it comes to Allah Himself. So تحكيم العقل مخالف للعقل. So judging with the aql or using the aql is something that goes against the aql itself. الثالث, number 3, أن الرجوع في ذلك إلى العقل مستلزم للاختلاف والتناقض. Using logic, okay, necessitates contradiction, confusion and contradiction. Using logic itself necessitates contradiction and confusion. Why? So, I have my own logic. أليس كذلك? You have logic. You have logic. Everyone has their own logic. Are our minds the same? The answer is no. Each one of us perceives and looks at the world, okay, according to your own perception and according to your own life experience. صح? According to how much you've read, how much knowledge you have, according to your own stereotypes, according to your own assumptions. Okay? So بأي عقل يوزن الكتاب والسنة. So which, as Shaykh Islam mentions in al-Hamawiyah, which logic should we use to measure the kitab and the sunnah with? My logic, your logic, Zayd's logic, Amr's logic, whose logic exactly? We asked the Ash'ari this question. Why is your logic better than my logic? What is the measurement we use to to believe that your logic is better than mine? There's nothing. So it causes confusion and contradiction. That's what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is saying. And the fact that this in and of itself, logic can cause confusion and contradiction, is in and of itself a refutation of logic, or of using or relying on logic. So he says, فَتَجِدُ أَحَدُهُمْ. So you'll see one of them will affirm what the other Ash'ari has negated. And sometimes the same Ash'ari, the same guy, okay, will contradict himself. So in one place he will affirm something, and somewhere else in another time he will negate the very thing that he affirmed previously in another sitting. Why? لأن ليس لهم قواعد. They have no principles. And when you go through life without any principles, then you're bound to fall into errors and into contradictions. Al-Imam Malik, then he mentions this qawl of Al-Imam Malik where he says, أَوَ كُلَّمَا جَاءَنَا رَجُلٌ أَجْدَلَ مِنْ رَجُلٍ تَرَكْنَا مَا جَاءَ بِهِ جِبْرِيلِ إِلَى مُحَمَّدٍ صلى الله عليه وسلم لِجَدَلِ هَؤُلَاء. He says that is every time, okay, he says that يعني, should we leave if every time a man who is more ajdal, يعني, a man who is more quarrelsome and who has يعني, logical arguments, if every time يعني, should we leave the kitab and the sunnah every time a man comes to us who's more quarrelsome and who has more logical arguments? Should we leave the kitab and the sunnah every time someone comes with logic? We go to him and we follow him, and then someone else comes who has even more stronger logic than the first one, so we follow him. So who do we follow then? The Imam Malik is saying this is the ma'al of logic. So if all you follow is logic and rationale, there will always be someone who's more logical than the first, because al-uqulu tatafawat. But when you follow the kitab and the sunnah, you are following Allah Azza wa Jalla and His Messenger. So you're following principles, and these principles are muttarida. We're going to stop here inshallah ta'ala, and we will continue tomorrow bi'idhnillah ta'ala from al-Rabi' number 4. Okay, I have page 26 inshallah ta'ala, and we'll continue inshallah the hujjaj of the Asha'ira, and then we move on to the Mu'tazila after them inshallah ta'ala. Wa sallallahu sallam ala nabiyyina.